A billionaire adopts black twins from an orphanage, but a DNA test brings unexpected results. What surprising connection will be revealed, changing their lives forever? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum buzzed with a quiet confidence of wealth. Evan Carter stood near a Roman sculpture, barely touching his champagne as he observed the annual charity gala's attendees. His tailored black suit felt more like armor than clothing, protecting him from the constant stream of sympathetic glances thrown his way. It had been 18 months since Sarah's death, but the weight of her absence still pressed against his chest like a stone. James Morrison, his longtime friend and business partner, approached with determined steps. "You can't keep living like this, Evan," he said, positioning himself to block the path of another well-meaning socialite heading their way. "The company's doing fine, your investments are solid, but you're barely existing." Evan's jaw tightened. He'd heard variations of this speech from every friend and family member over the past year. "I'm managing," he replied, the words automatic and hollow. "Managing isn't living," James countered, taking the barely touched champagne from Evan's hand and replacing it with a business card. "Look, I've been meaning to tell you about something. My wife's cousin runs this children's home upstate. They're doing amazing work with kids who need homes." Evan stared at the simple white card, Riverside Children's Home, where hope finds a family. The suggestion hung in the air between them, uncomfortable and tempting at the same time. "James, I don't think just visit," James interrupted. "No pressure, no expectations. Sarah always wanted children, Evan. You know that better than anyone." The mention of Sarah's dream of motherhood hit him like a physical blow. They'd tried for years, endured multiple failed fertility treatments, and were just starting to consider adoption when the accident happened. The memory of her excitement about potentially adopting made his chest ache. 2 weeks later, Evan found himself pulling up to Riverside Children's Home in his Tesla. The building was older but well-maintained, with cheerful yellow trim and a playground visible around the side. Inside, the walls were covered with children's artwork, and the sound of laughter echoed from somewhere deeper in the building. Mrs. Henderson, the director, led him through the facility, explaining their programs and philosophy. Evan nodded politely, but his attention was caught by two identical faces peeking around a doorframe. Twin girls, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, with matching dark curls and curious eyes. "That's Lila and Nia," Mrs. Henderson said, following his gaze. "They've been with us for almost 2 years now." The girls ducked back into the room when they realized they'd been spotted. Mrs. Henderson led Evan to the doorway, revealing a small library where the twins had returned to their previous activity. They sat cross-legged on a worn carpet, sharing a large picture book between them. One girl pointed at something on the page while the other giggled, their interaction so natural and comfortable it made Evan's heart twist. "Would you like to meet them?" Mrs. Henderson asked quietly. Before he could respond, one of the twins looked up and met his eyes. There was something in her gaze, a mixture of hope and wariness that felt painfully familiar. It was the same look he saw in his own mirror every morning. The first evening in his penthouse apartment was surreal. Where silence had reigned for 18 months, now there was movement and life. Lila and Nia explored their new rooms with wide-eyed wonder, their small hands touching everything, claiming the space in their own way. Their matching blue dresses, chosen by Mrs. Henderson for the occasion, made them look like characters from a storybook. Evan ordered pizza, a departure from his usual solitary meals of whatever his housekeeper left in the refrigerator. They ate at the kitchen island instead of the formal dining room, and the girls' delight at being allowed to use their hands made him smile despite himself. Later, as he read them a bedtime story, Evan felt something shift inside him. The girls leaned against him from either side, their warmth seeping through his dress shirt, their attention completely focused on the adventure of the 3 bears. For the first time since Sarah's death, the emptiness in his chest felt a little less consuming. But after tucking them in and retreating to his study, the familiar wave of grief returned. He found himself standing before the large window overlooking the city, Sarah's favorite spot in the apartment. "What am I doing?" he whispered to the glass. The responsibility of caring for these two innocent lives felt overwhelming. The twins deserved someone whole, someone who wasn't still struggling to piece themselves back together. Yet when he heard a small voice call Mr. Carter from the hallway and found Nia standing there clutching a stuffed rabbit and asking for a glass of water, he realized there was no turning back. These girls had already begun to carve out a space in his broken heart, and despite his fears, he knew he would do anything to protect them. Evan stood in the doorway of the playroom he'd hastily assembled, watching Lila and Nia arrange their new dolls on tiny furniture. The room had previously served as a home office, its transformation into a child's haven happening almost overnight. The stark white walls now displayed colorful artwork, and the hardwood floor was covered with a plush pink carpet. Despite the cheerful setting, doubt gnawed at him as he observed their interaction. Lila, the more outspoken of the twins, orchestrated their play with confident directions to her sister. Nia followed along quietly, occasionally adding her own creative touches to their makeshift storyline. Their synchronized movements and unspoken understanding reminded Evan of his own siblings, making him question his ability to understand and nurture this unique bond between the girls. "Daddy, look." Lila called out, the word daddy still new and uncertain on her tongue. She held up a drawing of what appeared to be 3 stick figures holding hands. "It's us." The simple artwork made his throat tight. They'd only been living with him for 2 weeks, but already they were incorporating him into their vision of family. Later that afternoon, while the girls napped under the watchful eye of their new nanny, Mrs. Rodriguez, Evan found himself in the master bedroom closet, searching for his passport for an upcoming business trip. As he reached for a box on the top shelf, another one tumbled down, its contents spilling across the floor. His heart stopped when he recognized Sarah's handwriting on the album cover, "Our Future Family." The leather-bound album opened to a collection of nursery designs Sarah had carefully clipped from magazines. Each page featured her neat handwriting describing her vision: yellow for gender-neutral, stars and moons theme, reading nook essential. The further he went, the more personal it became. Fertility treatment schedules, adoption agency pamphlets, and finally, a letter she'd written to their future child, dated just 3 weeks before the accident. Evan's hands trembled as he read her words. "My darling, I don't know you yet, but I dream of you every day. Your father and I have so much love to give." The letter blurred as tears filled his eyes. He sat there on the closet floor, surrounded by the physical remnants of Sarah's dreams, feeling the full weight of what he'd taken on with the twins. Mrs. Rodriguez's gentle knock startled him. "Mr. Carter, the girls are awake. They're asking for you." Wiping his eyes, Evan carefully returned the album to its box.
The past
couldn't be changed, but perhaps Sarah's dreams of creating a family could still be realized, just not in the way they'd planned. "Let's go to the park," he announced when he found the girls in the kitchen, having their afternoon snack. The suggestion was partially to distract himself, but mostly because he remembered Sarah saying children needed fresh air and exercise. Central Park wasn't far, and the autumn weather was perfect for outdoor activities. The girls' excitement was immediate and contagious. They rushed to put on their matching red coats, a purchase Mrs. Rodriguez had helped to make. At the park, their energy seemed boundless. They ran from the swings to the slide, their laughter carrying across the playground. Evan found himself pushed into participation, taking turns pushing them on the swings, their demands of higher, higher, making him both nervous and happy. Other parents smiled knowingly at him, probably assuming he was just another dad enjoying a weekend with his kids. They couldn't see how each moment of joy was shadowed by his awareness of Sarah's absence. She should have been there, showing him how to properly push a swing, knowing instinctively when to step in and when to let the girls figure things out for themselves. A small crisis erupted when Nia fell and scraped her knee. Evan's heart raced as he rushed to her side, uncertain how to handle the situation. But before he could panic, Lila was there, holding her sister's hand and whispering comfort in that special way siblings do. Evan cleaned the scratch with a tissue and water from his bottle, applied a Band-Aid from the first aid kit Mrs. Rodriguez had insisted he carry, and found himself embracing both girls as they sought comfort in his arms. The moment struck him with its significance. These children needed him, not just for the big things like shelter and education, but for the countless small moments that made up a family life. The shadow of his grief didn't disappear, but it shifted, making room for something new, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since Sarah's death. As they walked home, each girl holding one of his hands, Evan realized that while he might not be the perfect father these girls deserved, he was the father they had. The responsibility terrified him, but the alternative, returning to his empty life of boardrooms and silent evenings, was unthinkable. Sarah's absence would always be part of their story, but perhaps it could be the beginning rather than the end. Evan sat in his home office late one night, staring at the DNA test results website on his computer screen. The decision to investigate the twins' genetic background hadn't come easily. 3 months into their new life together, questions about their biological parents and medical history had begun surfacing, particularly during routine doctor visits. The girls' medical records from the orphanage were sparse, with significant gaps that concerned their pediatrician. His cursor hovered over the Order Now button for several minutes before he finally clicked. The test kits arrived in discreet packaging 2 days later. Collecting the DNA samples had been simple enough. The girls thought it was a game when he swabbed the insides of their cheeks, telling them they were playing doctor. He'd felt guilty about the deception, but reasoned that knowing their medical background was important for their future health. What he hadn't expected was the email that now lit up his screen at 2 a.m., marked Urgent, DNA Match Found. His hands trembled as he opened the attachment. The technical language swam before his eyes until he reached a section highlighted in red. Genetic markers indicate direct familial relationship with subjects involved in case number 47829, the Morton Heights criminal investigation. The Morton Heights case. Even after 7 years, the name sent chills through the business community. A sophisticated criminal enterprise that had laundered billions through legitimate businesses, ending in multiple arrests and 3 deaths. Evan remembered reading about it in the financial papers, studying it as a cautionary tale in corporate governance. He clicked through multiple tabs, his mind racing. The genetic markers showed a clear connection to 2 of the primary suspects in the case. The implications were staggering. His daughters, because that's what they were now, regardless of biology, had direct genetic links to one of the biggest criminal cases in recent history. The sound of small feet in the hallway made him quickly close the laptop. Nia appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "I had a bad dream," she whispered. Evan lifted her onto his lap, breathing in the sweet smell of her shampoo, trying to reconcile this innocent child with the disturbing information he'd just discovered. Over the next few weeks, Evan began investigating discreetly. He hired a private investigator with experience in sensitive cases, sworn to absolute confidentiality. The PI's preliminary reports painted a complex picture. The twins had been born during the height of the criminal enterprise's operations. Their birth certificates listed false names for the parents, and their placement in the orphanage coincided with the final police raid on the organization. Each new piece of information felt like a weight added to Evan's shoulders. During the day, he maintained normalcy, attending school functions, helping with homework, playing in the park. But at night, after the girls were asleep, he pored over old news articles and court records, trying to understand the world his daughters had come from. The investigation led him to a storage facility on the outskirts of the city. The PI had traced a paper trail connecting it to one of the imprisoned conspirators. Inside, Evan found boxes of documents, financial records, photographs, and personal letters. Among them was a photograph that made his blood run cold. A pregnant woman standing next to a man he recognized from the news coverage, both smiling at the camera. The woman's face showed clear resemblance to his girls. As he drove home that night, his mind raced with questions. How much of this should he share with the twins? They were too young to understand now, but eventually, they would have questions about their origins. The weight of protecting them from this truth while preparing for its eventual revelation felt overwhelming. That evening, watching Lila and Nia play with their dolls, Evan noticed details he'd overlooked before. The way Lila organized her toys with almost obsessive precision, how Nia could instinctively read people's emotions. Were these inherited traits from their biological parents? The thought made him shudder. His protective instincts warred with his sense of duty. These children deserve to know their history, but not yet. Not while they were still creating happy memories and learning to trust in their new life. The truth would have to wait, but Evan knew it wouldn't wait forever. Somewhere out there, people connected to the Morton Heights case might still remember the twins. The thought kept him awake at night, wondering if his decision to adopt them had inadvertently put them at risk. The investigation had opened a Pandora's box of questions. Who else knew about the twins' connection to the case? Were there people who might come looking for them? How could he protect them while being honest about their past? Each question led to more, creating a web of complexity that threatened to overwhelm him. The mahogany-paneled law office of Richardson and Associates provided little comfort as Evan sat across from Marcus Richardson, his longtime legal counsel and friend. The morning sun cast long shadows through the Venetian blinds, creating prison bar patterns across the polished desk between them. Evan had just finished explaining the DNA test results and his subsequent investigation. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, his expression Rave. The implications for your business empire are significant, Evan. The Morton Heights case wasn't just about money laundering. It involved political corruption, international crime syndicates, and several unsolved disappearances. Having your name connected to it, even peripherally through the twins' adoption, could spook investors. Evan watched as Marcus pulled up financial projections on his computer. The numbers told a stark story. Even a hint of controversy could trigger a chain reaction affecting stock prices, partner relationships, and pending contracts. The Carter Foundation's charitable works, including their recent initiative for underprivileged children, could face increased scrutiny and skepticism. We need to get ahead of this, Marcus continued, his tone shifting from friend to legal strategist. I suggest we conduct a thorough audit of the adoption process, ensure every document is ironclad, and prepare statements in case this goes public. We should also consider setting up a trust for the girls that's separate from your main assets, protecting their future regardless of what happens. While Marcus spoke, Evan's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez. She'd sent a photo of Lila and Nia in their school uniforms, standing with their new friend Tommy in the playground. The sight of their innocent smiles contrasted sharply with the serious conversation at hand. Later that afternoon, during pickup at Riverside Elementary, Tommy's father approached Evan. The man's weathered face and nervous demeanor set off immediate alarm bells. "Mr. Carter," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one was within earshot, "I need to tell you something about Tommy's mother and me. We were involved in some things years ago. Things that might concern you, given who your girls are." The revelation hit Evan like a physical blow. Tommy's father, Michael Brooks, had served 3 years for his role in the Morton Heights case. He'd been a low-level accountant who'd helped process some of the laundered funds. Now he worked as a night security guard, trying to rebuild his life. "I recognized them as soon as Tommy mentioned the new twins in his class," Michael continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I worked with their mother. She was a good person who got caught up in something bigger than herself. I just thought you should know, there are others who might recognize them too." The playground suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. Evan watched as Lila and Nia played with Tommy on the monkey bars, their laughter carrying across the schoolyard. The scene that had brought him joy just moments ago now filled him with apprehension. How many other parents, teachers, or random passers-by might recognize his daughters? How many connections to their past were hiding in plain sight? That evening, while the girls did their homework at the kitchen island, Evan observed them with new awareness. Lila helped Nia with a math problem, showing natural leadership skills that reminded him uncomfortably of the charismatic criminals who had led the Morton Heights operation. Nia's intuitive grasp of patterns and numbers echoed reports about the sophisticated financial schemes they'd employed. The anxiety that had been building since the DNA test results intensified. Every proud parent moment now carried a shadow of doubt. When Lila showed exceptional persuasion skills during the school's fundraiser, was that inherited from someone who had used similar talents for manipulation? When Nia demonstrated an uncanny ability to remember complex sequences, was that a genetic gift from someone who had used such skills to crack security codes? Mrs. Rodriguez noticed his distraction during dinner. After the girls were in bed, she approached him in his study. "Mr. Carter, forgive me for speaking freely, but those girls adore you. Whatever's troubling you, remember that love and nurture shape children more than anything else. Her words offered Elle. It'll comfort as Evan stayed up late into the night, reviewing security measures and contingency plans. He increased the number of bodyguards discreetly watching the school, upgraded the apartment security system, and began researching private schools in other cities, just in case. The carefree days of simply enjoying his new family were giving way to a constant state of vigilance. The chance meeting with Sarah Morrison happened at an art gallery fundraiser for the twin school. She stood before a large abstract painting, her dark hair falling past her shoulders, reminding Evan painfully of the photograph he'd found in the storage unit. When she turned and introduced herself, he noticed her eyes held the same haunted awareness he often saw in his own reflection. "I've been wanting to meet you, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice carrying a quiet intensity. "I'm Sarah Morrison, and I believe we have a complicated connection through the Morton Heights case." The directness of her approach left him momentarily speechless. Around them, other parents and patrons mingled, their cheerful conversations creating a surreal backdrop to this pivotal moment. Sarah explained her situation with careful precision. Her father, James Morrison, no relation to Evan's friend James, had been one of the key figures in the criminal enterprise. She'd spent years distancing herself from his legacy, building a legitimate career as an art curator and working with organizations that helped families affected by white-collar crime. "I know about the twins," she continued, leading him to a quieter corner of the gallery. "I've been following their story since I heard about their adoption. You see, I was there when they were born." The revelation sent a chill down Evan's spine. Sarah explained that she'd been 22 when the case broke, old enough to understand everything but powerless to stop it. Over the next few weeks, Sarah became an unexpected ally. They met regularly at a quiet cafe near his office, where she shared pieces of the puzzle he'd been trying to solve. She remembered the twins' mother, Elena, describing her as a brilliant computer programmer who'd been coerced into the organization through a combination of threats and false promises. "Elena wasn't like the others," Sarah explained during one of their meetings. "She wanted out, especially after she learned she was pregnant. She was planning to cooperate with the authorities, but..." Sarah's voice trailed off, leaving the tragic end of Elena's story unspoken. The official reports listed her death as a suicide, but Sarah's expression suggested there was more to the story. Despite his initial reservations, Evan found himself drawn to Sarah's determination to right the wrongs of the past. She understood the weight of inherited guilt, the complex emotions that came with trying to build something good from a foundation of darkness. During their conversations, he caught glimpses of the same strength he saw in his daughters, survivors adapting and thriving despite their circumstances. However, trust came slowly. Evan had his private investigator verify every detail of Sarah's story, watching for any inconsistencies that might suggest ulterior motives. The investigation revealed only more connections. Sarah had been quietly supporting various children affected by the case, using her inheritance to establish educational funds and counseling services. Their relationship evolved cautiously. Sarah visited the apartment for dinner one evening, bringing art supplies for the girls. Watching her interact with the twins stirred complicated emotions in Evan. She knew exactly how to talk to them, understanding their personalities in a way that spoke of familiarity with their biological family. Lila's artistic talent, she noted, came from Elena. Nia's quiet thoughtfulness reminded her of Elena's younger sister. After the girls went to bed, Sarah shared more about the case's impact on her own life. "I lost everything when the truth came out," she explained, sitting in the living room with a glass of wine. "My friends, my family's reputation, my trust in people. But it taught me something valuable. We're not defined by our parents' choices. We can choose a different path." The sentiment resonated deeply with Evan, who'd spent months worrying about the twins' genetic inheritance. Yet watching Sarah, who'd emerged from the same darkness to create something meaningful, offered a new perspective. Perhaps the very traits that had been misused by their biological family, intelligence, charisma, determination, could be channeled toward positive ends. Still, moments of doubt crept in. When Sarah looked at family photos on the wall or asked detailed questions about the girls' daily routines, Evan wondered if he was being naive. The Morton Heights case had been built on trust betrayed, on seemingly genuine relationships that masked darker intentions. Was he risking everything by letting Sarah into their lives? The conversation started innocently enough during Saturday morning pancakes, a tradition Evan had established to create stability in their new family life. Lila, methodically cutting her pancake into precise squares, looked up and asked, "Why don't we look like you, Daddy?" The question hung in the air like suspended time, syrup dripping slowly from Nia's forgotten fork. Evan's heart raced as he considered his response. Over the past months, he'd consulted child psychologists about how to approach the topic of adoption and heritage with the twins. Now, faced with the actual moment, all their professional advice seemed inadequate against the innocent curiosity in his daughter's eyes. "Well," he began, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Remember how we talked about adoption? About how families can be made in different ways?" The girls nodded, their matching dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that reminded him of their biological mother's photograph. Sometimes children have birth parents who aren't able to take care of them, and then they find new parents who can. That's what happened with us. Nia, usually the quieter of the two, surprised him by asking, "Did our first parents do something bad?" The question sent a jolt through Evan. Had she overheard something at school? Had Tommy's father said something to his son that made its way to the twins? Sarah, who had become a regular presence in their lives, chose that moment to arrive for their planned museum visit. Her appearance provided a temporary distraction, but Evan could see the questions hadn't been forgotten, merely postponed. Later that afternoon, while the girls explored an interactive science exhibit, Evan pulled Sarah aside to discuss the morning's conversation. "They're starting to ask questions," he whispered, watching the twins experiment with a magnetic field display. "I don't want to lie to them, but how do you tell 7-year-olds that their biological family was involved in one of the biggest criminal enterprises in recent history?" Sarah's response was measured, drawn from her own experience of discovering difficult truths about her family. "Children understand more than we give them credit for," she said. "They also sense when adults are hiding things. The truth, told with love and at their level, is better than letting them piece together fragments and imagine worse scenarios." That evening, after Sarah left, Evan sat with the girls in their playroom. Surrounded by the stuffed animals and art supplies that represented their current innocent world, he began the difficult task of sharing their history. He chose his words carefully, speaking in terms they could understand without overwhelming them with details. "Your first family," he explained, "made some mistakes and got into trouble with the law. But that doesn't define who you are. Just like how sometimes you make a wrong choice but learn from it to make better ones." He watched their faces closely, ready to stop if the information seemed too much. Lila, ever the protector, wrapped an arm around Nia before asking, "Is that why they couldn't keep us?" The question broke Evan's heart even as it reinforced his commitment to these remarkable children. "Yes," he answered honestly, "but it's also why I got to become your daddy, and that makes me very thankful." During the conversation, Evan noticed something remarkable. While the girls processed this new information about their past, they remained firmly anchored in their present reality. They asked questions about their birth parents, but always returned to reassuring themselves about their current family situation. "But you'll always be our daddy now, right?" Nia asked repeatedly, each time relaxing at his firm "always." Sarah proved invaluable during this period, helping Evan navigate the delicate balance between honesty and age-appropriate disclosure. Together, they decided to contact the elderly former detective who had worked the Morton Heights case, hoping he could provide additional context that might help the girls understand their history without being traumatized by it. As Evan tucked the girls into bed that night, their questions temporarily exhausted, he realized that this conversation marked a turning point. The truth, partial though it was, had been spoken aloud, transforming from a shadowy threat into something they could face together as a family. Former Detective Michael Reeves met them in a sunlit conference room at Evan's corporate office, his weathered face and arthritic hands telling the story of decades in law enforcement. The retired investigator spread out carefully preserved case files, each document representing a piece of the complex puzzle that had shaped the twins' early life. The Morton Heights operation wasn't just about money, Reeves explained, his voice carrying the weight of long-buried memories. They were creating new identities, establishing false paper trails, and infiltrating legitimate businesses. The twins' birth certificates were part of a larger scheme involving medical records and insurance fraud. Their mother, Elena, discovered this while working on their database systems. Sarah leaned forward, her fingers tracing a timeline document. That's what pushed her to consider becoming an informant, wasn't it? The detective nodded, pulling out a sealed evidence bag containing a USB drive. He explained that Elena had collected substantial evidence about the organization's activities, encrypting it with a complex algorithm she designed herself. The encryption key, Reeves continued, his eyes meeting Evan's with significance, was based on her daughter's genetic markers. She believed no one would think to look for it there, and it would ensure the information stayed protected until the girls were old enough to understand their role in bringing down the organization. The revelation stunned Evan. His daughters weren't just connected to the case, they were literally encoded into its deepest secrets. The implications of this discovery weighed heavily as he drove home that evening, his mind racing with possibilities and dangers he hadn't previously considered. At home, life continued its seemingly normal rhythm. The twins worked on their homework at the kitchen island while Mrs. Rodriguez prepared dinner, but Evan noticed small changes in their behavior. Lila had begun drawing intricate patterns in her art projects, unconsciously mirroring the complexity of her mother's encryption work. Nia displayed an uncanny ability to solve complex puzzles, completing advanced riddles meant for much older children. The breaking point came during a routine afternoon, when the girls were helping Evan organize his home office. Nia discovered an old photograph that had fallen behind the filing cabinet, a newspaper clipping about the Morton Heights case that Evan had carelessly misplaced. The image showed their biological mother being led away by P. Alice, her face partially obscured but unmistakably similar to their own. "That's her, isn't it?" Nia whispered, her small finger pointing to Elena's figure in the photograph. Lila crowded close, both girls studying the image with an intensity that made Evan's chest tighten. He couldn't bring himself to lie, not when they'd already begun piecing together their history. "Yes," he confirmed, kneeling beside them. "That's Elena, your birth mother." The girls absorbed this information with remarkable composure, their reactions shaped by the partial truths he'd already shared. But their questions revealed a deeper understanding than he'd anticipated. Was she trying to help people? Lila asked, her voice carrying an edge of hope. Detective Reeves said some people in bad situations try to make things right. The question revealed that the girls had been processing everything they'd overheard, creating their own narrative about their origins. Evan shared what he could about Elena's attempt to expose the criminal organization, carefully framing it in terms of courage and doing what's right, even when it's difficult. The girls listened intently, their expressions shifting between curiosity and concern as they grappled with this new information about their biological mother's fate. As he watched them process this revelation, Evan realized that protecting them didn't mean shielding them from every difficult truth. Instead, it meant helping them understand their history while ensuring they knew their past didn't define their future. The encoded USB drive represented not just evidence of crimes, but a mother's final attempt to secure a better future for her daughters. The weight of truth pressed heavily on Evan as he sat in his study late one night, the city lights twinkling beyond his window like distant stars. Sarah sat across from him, her presence having become a steady comfort in these moments of uncertainty. The discovery of Elena's encrypted drive had changed everything, transforming their simple adoption story into something far more complex. "I've spent so much time trying to protect them," Evan confessed, running his fingers through his graying hair. "But maybe protection isn't what they need most right now." Sarah listened intently as he described the girls' reactions to finding Elena's photograph, their surprisingly mature questions, and their growing awareness of their unique situation. Through their regular conversations, Evan had noticed how the twins processed information differently now. During dinner, Lila would occasionally pause mid-story to ask if certain behaviors they witnessed at school might be like what the bad people did. Nia had developed a habit of categorizing actions as helping or hurting choices, clearly trying to understand the moral complexity of their biological family's history. Sarah shared her own experience of discovering difficult truths about her father. "I was older than they are," she explained, "but I remember the relief of finally understanding why people treated our family differently. The whispers, the sudden ends to friendships. Everything made sense once I knew the truth. It was painful, but it was better than the confusion of not knowing." Their discussion was interrupted by soft footsteps in the hallway. Nia appeared in the doorway, clutching her beloved stuffed rabbit. But instead of her usual request for water or comfort after a bad dream, she asked a question that demonstrated how much she'd been processing. Did our first mom make helping choices or hurting choices? The question created a moment of profound silence. Evan gestured for Nia to join him on the couch, and soon Lila appeared as well, as if sensing her twins' emotional need. Sarah moved to leave, but Evan shook his head. Her perspective would be valuable in this conversation. "Your birth mother, Elena," Evan began carefully, found herself in a difficult situation. When she realized she was part of something wrong, she tried to make it right. She made choices to protect you both and help stop people who were hurting others. He watched their young faces absorb this information, seeing glimmers of understanding in their expressions. Sarah added her own gentle insight. "Sometimes good people can get caught up in bad situations, but what matters is the choices they make when they realize something is wrong. Elena made brave choices, thinking of you both." The conversation evolved naturally, with the girls asking questions that revealed both their innocence and their growing comprehension of complex moral issues. Lila wanted to know if their artistic talents came from Elena, while Nia wondered if their ability to solve puzzles was something they inherited from her. As the night deepened, Evan realized that this moment of vulnerability and truth had strengthened, not weakened, their family bonds. The girls curled up against him, tired but somehow more settled than they'd been in weeks. Their questions, though difficult, came from a place of seeking understanding rather than fear. Before guiding the sleepy twins back to bed, Lila asked one final question that demonstrated their emotional maturity. "Is it okay to love our first mom and still love you most?" The question brought tears to Evan's eyes as he assured them that love wasn't a limited resource. They could honor Elena's memory while fully embracing their life with him. The morning they decided to visit Detective Reeves at his home carried the weight of inevitability. Evan had carefully prepared the twins for this meeting, explaining that the retired detective could help them understand more about their history. The girls sat quietly in the back seat during the drive to the detective's modest suburban house, their matching navy dresses and patent leather shoes reflecting the significance they sensed in this moment. Detective Reeves had transformed his sunroom into an informal archive of the Morton Heights case. Afternoon light filtered through large windows, illuminating walls covered with timeline charts and connection diagrams. He'd taken care to remove the more disturbing elements before the girls' arrival, leaving only what would help them understand their place in this complex narrative. "Your mother," Reeves began, addressing the twins with grandfatherly gentleness, "was one of the brightest people I've ever met." He showed them a photograph of Elena at her college graduation, years before her involvement with the criminal organization. The image showed a young woman with the same dark curls and determined expression the girls often displayed. She was a computer genius who wanted to make the world better through technology. As the detective shared carefully selected stories about Elena's life, Evan noticed both girls leaning forward, drinking in every detail about the woman who had given them life. Then came the moment that changed everything. Reeves pulled out a sealed envelope, his arthritis-gnarled hands trembling slightly as he opened it. "There's something you need to know," he said, looking directly at Nia. "According to DNA analysis we did during the investigation, you have a different biological father than your sister." The revelation landed like a thunderclap in the quiet room. The twins instinctively reached for each other's hands, their bond visibly strengthening in the face of this unexpected news. Reeves explained that Elena had been involved with two men during the time leading up to her pregnancy. One was Marcus Cole, a low-level associate in the organization who had shown kindness to Elena and helped her gather evidence. The other was James Morrison, Sarah's father, and one of the operations leaders. The complexity of these relationships had been deliberately obscured to protect the twins. Evan watched his daughters process this information, amazed by their resilience. Rather than being distressed by the revelation, they seemed more concerned with confirming they were still real twins. "We shared the same home in Mom's belly," Lila declared firmly, squeezing her sister's hand. "That's what matters." The detective then revealed another layer of the story. Elena had discovered her pregnancy coincided with her growing awareness of the organization's criminal activities. She had used this situation to her advantage, knowing that her condition would lower suspicions about her activities while she gathered evidence. The encryption key based on the twins' genetic markers wasn't just clever programming. It was a mother's way of ensuring her children would someday understand the full scope of her sacrifice. As the meeting continued, both girls displayed an extraordinary maturity in their questions. They wanted to know about Elena's favorite books, her hopes for their future, and whether she had left any messages for them. Reeves shared what he could, including a journal Elena had kept during her pregnancy, which he had safeguarded all these years. The most poignant moment came when Nia discovered a note Elena had written specifically for her, predicting that someday she would learn about her different paternity. "My precious daughter," the note read, "your uniqueness makes you even more special. You and your sister are bound by something stronger than genetics. You're bound by love, by shared experiences, and by a mother's heart that loved you both equally from the first moment." The revelation about Sarah's connection to the twins manifested during an ordinary evening at Evan's apartment. Sarah had brought over old family photographs to share with the girls, continuing their exploration of their heritage. As she pulled out a particular image from her college years, her hands began to tremble. The photograph showed a younger Sarah standing beside her father, James Morrison, at a family gathering. Behind them, partially visible but unmistakable, was Elena. "I've been trying to find the right way to tell you," Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew Elena before any of this started. She was my father's protege at his technology firm. I watched her transformation from a brilliant programmer to someone trapped in his web of deception." The admission hung in the air as Evan processed its implications. Detective Reeves, who had been invited to help contextualize more family history, produced a DNA analysis report he'd held back until this moment. The genetic markers showed an undeniable truth. Sarah wasn't just connected to the twins through her father's criminal enterprise. She was their half-sister. Elena's involvement with James Morrison had produced Nia, while Lila's father had been Marcus Cole, the associate who helped Elena gather evidence. The complexity of these relationships struck Evan with devastating clarity. Sarah's growing presence in their lives, her immediate connection with the twins, her deep understanding of their mannerisms, everything took on new meaning. He found himself questioning every interaction, every shared moment, wondering if Sarah had orchestrated their meeting, if her apparent desire to help had been driven by blood ties rather than altruism. But as he watched Sarah interact with the twins, who had been playing nearby and gradually became aware of the adults' serious discussion, he saw something that transcended his suspicions. The genuine love and protective instinct she showed toward her newly discovered sisters couldn't be feigned. Her tears as she explained their connection came from a place of long-held pain and hope, not manipulation. "I wanted to protect them too," Sarah explained, her composure cracking. "When I learned about the adoption, I knew I had to be part of their lives, but I couldn't just announce myself as their sister. I needed to make sure they had stability first, that they were truly happy with you, Evan." The twins' reaction to this news demonstrated the emotional maturity they developed through months of gradually learning about their complex history. Instead of being traumatized by another revelation about their biological family, they approached Sarah with curiosity and acceptance. Lila, ever the protective sister, simply asked, "Does this mean we have a big sister to help us with homework now?" Evan observed this moment of family reconstruction with mixed emotions. His fear of losing the twins to their biological connections warred with his understanding that giving them a fuller sense of identity and family would ultimately benefit them. Sarah had proven herself trustworthy not just through her actions, but through her patient approach to revealing the truth. The final piece of Elena's legacy, the The encrypted drive containing evidence of a criminal enterprise took on new significance. The encryption key, based on both twins' genetic markers, had been Elena's way of ensuring her daughters would someday work together to uncover the complete truth. It was her last gift to them, the tools to understand their past while building their future. As the evening drew to a close, Evan realized that true redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about transforming it into something meaningful. His initial quest to fill the void left by his wife's death had led him to create something far more profound, a family bound together not just by blood or legal documents, but by choice, truth, and love. The twins fell asleep that night with a broader understanding of their family tree, while Evan and Sarah sat in the living room, planning how to move forward. They would need to work together to protect the girls, to help them understand their heritage without being defined by it, and to create a future that honored Elena's sacrifice while building something new. Family isn't just about DNA, Evan concluded, watching the city lights flicker beyond his window. It's about who chooses to stay, who fights to protect, who loves without condition. Sarah nodded, understanding that their unusual family structure had become a source of strength rather than shame, a testament to the power of love to transform even the darkest origins into something beautiful.